Hello and welcome to the session on traditional project management, that is how to scope a TPM. Before we move forward, here is the learning outcome. At the end of this session, students will be able to uniquely identify the managing clients' expectations and the conditions of satisfaction's development process. Here, using tools, templates and processes to scope a project. The effective scoping of a project is as much as a art and it is a science. A number of tools, templates, and processes can be used during the scoping effort, and they are all precisely defined and documented. Here, the science of scoping, knowing your client, your organization's environment, and the market situations, and how to adapt the tools, templates, and the processes for the part of the art of scoping. Here, virtually all of the scoping efforts involves an interaction and the collaboration between the client who is requesting a service or a product, the project, the project manager who is providing the service or product. That collaboration can be very informal. Here, in both the cases, a document is prepared that answers the questions: what will you do and how will you know you did it. Here, the nature of that relationship will contribute to how the scoping effort proceeds and how successful it is. Managing client expectations, somehow clients always seems to expect more than project managers which are prepared for or maybe capable for delivering the product. Here, it is more the result of a failure to communicate that is anything else. So the lack of communication starts at the beginning of a project and extends all the way to the end. So wants versus needs. The root cause of many communication problems originates from the disconnects between what the client says they want and what they really need. If the project manager doesn't pay attention, that disconnects may not be very obvious at the beginning of the scoping phase. The wants and needs closely linked to one another but are fundamentally different. The clients tends to be associated with the solution to a problem that they envision. So that needs to tend to be associated with the actual problem. If wants are derived from a clear understanding of needs, then it is safe to proceed based on what the client wants. But you cannot always know that this is the case. Here you can see the diagram of the project scoping process. So you can see here the conduct conditions of satisfaction, that is costs. So it will be defined here. You can see here the conduct conditions of satisfactions, then define requirements that goes to check whether right POS. If it is no, then it will go to the project scoping meeting phase. In that it has to follow five phases, okay, five steps it has to follow. And if the right POS, if the conditions satisfy, then the submit the PO. Conducting conditions of satisfaction. So if I pick one area where a project runs to trouble, then I would pick the very beginning. For some reason, the people have a difficult time understanding what they are saying to another. But oftenly, you find yourself thinking about what you are going to say while the other person is talking. If you are going to be successful project manager, you must stop that kind of behavior. As a project manager, it is essential that you must have to cultivate good listening skills. The COS is a structured conversation between the client, that is the requester, and the project manager, that is the provider. Here, the deliverable from COS is one page document which is called the project overview statement, that is POS. The POS is a template that is used to clearly state that what is to be done. It is signed by the requester and the provider as a record of their COS session. When the POS is approved by senior management, the scoping phase is complete and the project moves to the planning phase. Here you can see the process developing of the COS involves four parts: the request, clarification, response, and agreement. Request is made by a client. Clarification: the provider explains what he or she heard as the request. This conversation continues until the client satisfied that the provider clearly understands the request. Both parties have now established a clear understanding of the request in the language of requester. Third, response. The provider states what he or she capable of doing to satisfy the request. Agreement. The client restate what he or she understands the provider will provide. The conversation continues until the provider is satisfied that the client clearly understands what is being provided. At this particular point, both parties have established a clear understanding of what is being provided in the language of provider. Establishing clarity of purpose. So by the time if you leave the COS session, both you and the client have stated your positions and know that the other party understands your position. You and the client will have planned the seeds for continuing dialogues. As the project work progress, any changes that come up and it can be dealt with effectively because the effort to understand each other has been made up in front. The final step in the cost process is to negotiate to closure on exactly what will be done to meet the requirement or the request. Here, usually some of the types of compromise will negotiated and the final agreement is documented in the POS. Specifying business outcomes. So it is good idea to specify within the COS exactly what outcomes demonstrate that COS has been met. The outcomes have been called success criteria, and which is going to be explicit business outcomes and objectives among the other names. So whatever terms that you use, you are referring to an quantitative metric that signals success. Conducting COS milestone. The COS is not a static agreement, it is a dynamic agreement that becomes the part of the continual project monitoring process. The situation change throughout the project life cycle and so will needs to be the client, which means that the COS will change. The review of the COS at every major project. The project scoping meeting. You have a variety of ways to. The first is purpose. The scoping meeting has two purposes. The first is to create a requirements breakdown structures, that is RBS. The second is to draft the POS, and the RBS is used to help the team to decide which project manager approach is the best fit for this particular project. Attendees. A project scoping meeting attended by 15 to 20 people is large, but here there are the three groups need to be represented in the scoping meeting. The client group, the decision makers as well as the operations, the project manager and the core members of the project team. The core members are experienced professionals. The facilitator groups, this group might comprise 2 or 3 individuals who are experienced in conducting scoping and planning meetings. Agenda. A typical agenda for the scoping meeting includes the introductions, then purpose of meetings, the review of COS if one exists, the description of the current state, description of the problem or business opportunities, description of the end state, the requirements, elicitation and the decompositions, discussion of the gap between the current and the end states, choose the best fit project management approaches to close the gap, draft and approve the POS. So here is my reference.